week 2 of the show. We made it through week 1. And we got a big show for you coming up today. I guess you could call it Overreaction Monday from last Saturday's college football games and, of course, yesterday and what's going on with some of the teams in the NFL. But we're going to focus mainly on the New England Patriots, Pittsburgh Steelers game last night, coming up with Tom Curran of NBC Sports Boston. He's about as good a guy as you literally could talk to on this subject right now. He's going to be coming up with us shortly to talk about the Patriots, the demolition of the Steelers, and we'll also, of course, get into Antonio Brown. And I want to reiterate to any Patriots fan or anybody out there, if you're a Steelers fan, I know you're on the FanCred app here on Sportsbybrooks on FanCred. If you're on the app, hit that fan line on your screen. And I'm happy to talk to you all morning long and all afternoon long, for that matter, depending on where you are around the country. In fact, I want to get your thoughts on a couple of different subjects that I may or may not touch on with Tom Curran of NBC Sports Boston coming up. And my question for Patriots fans, you guys out there in particular, are you having a little buyer's remorse after watching a 33-3 shellacking of the Steelers yesterday when it comes to bringing in Antonio Brown? I'm not so sure. Hey, what's going on, Tom?
Yeah, babe.
Tom Curran of NBC Sports Boston is joining us here on Sportsbybrooks on FanCred. And there's no better person pretty much breathing right now, I think, to talk to about the subject of the New England Patriots and the situation with Antonio Brown.
Bobo, come here. Come out on the porch. Come on, Bobo.
Beautiful. That is what a life. That is what a gorgeous day, by the way. In Boston.
Oh, it's great up here, man.
Unbelievable.
Good day to welcome a diva.
I was going to ask you, Tom, and I was just about to throw this out to the fans out there on our fan line on the show. Do you think there, especially after the 33-3 win over the Steelers yesterday, do you think there could be a little buyer's remorse now with Antonio coming in after that huge win?
I don't. I mean, what we're seeing here is over-the-top enthusiasm. Can you hear me okay from this distance?
Yeah, I can hear you perfect.
Awesome.
You look perfect. You look great.
Just over-the-top enthusiasm for what this team can be. And comparisons that I'm listening to on WEEI as I drove to get my coffee were that this will be a team that, if you go player for player at the wide receiver position, is better than the 2007 team. I don't know if I can go that far because you're really betting on players and resumes from the past. But people are. There is no buyer's remorse. It's just, my God, how good can we be?
Well, I don't know about you, and I know you've been around a long time, in particular up in that market with the Patriots. Does it sound like, is there a little echoing of famous last words here? Do you feel that at all, Tom?
Yeah, because we see this so often, especially in the NFL and especially in the first weeks of every season. Nothing really seems to declare itself until Columbus Day, and now the way teams approach the preseason, I think, Brooksy, it takes even longer than that. You're not even until Halloween sometimes before teams declare themselves. Look at Indianapolis last year, and I know they had the Andrew Luck situation before he came back and they went on a run. Patriots didn't declare themselves until really late October, and then they had a glitch and had to figure themselves out again. So this stuff takes so long. And then there's attrition, and there's so many different things that happen. Look, and I don't want to babble on, but look at the 2015 Patriots. That might have been the most potent offensive team that I've seen. They lost Dion Lewis and left tackle Nate Solder. And by the end of the year, they got their asses kicked by Denver on the road in the playoffs because they were out of humans.
Well, I'm really wondering, though, and the more I hear you talk and the more I've read some of the things you've written and some of the people that I've seen you've talked to on NBC Sports Boston, when you look at the kind of game that Antonio, forget about the off the field stuff, but just the game on the field, is this guy going to fit? I mean, what's your impression? What are you hearing? What are you thinking going into this shotgun marriage?
Yeah, it is too. It's a good way of putting it, especially when it comes to Josh McDaniels and Tom Brady. Bill Belichick does not consult them, whereas Peyton Manning and all the upper tier quarterbacks, whether it's Aaron Rodgers, they seem to have a level of personnel input. Brady does not get consulted, nor does McDaniels. They don't know. They don't know anything until they wake up and they're told we just did this. So it is a shotgun marriage. The people I spoke to in Pittsburgh, from Pittsburgh at the game last night, because I think that's a great angle, and who knows better what was going on in Pittsburgh, stressed over and over again that as brilliant as Brown is, he's not meticulous in his route running. He's not meticulous in his study. The hard work that he expends is on his body, on his speed, on his quickness, not on the book learning. And as a result, if the route is supposed to be at 12 and cut off in front of the safety, if he gets to 12 and the safety's there, he might loop around him. And that's why Mark Caboli from The Athletic was saying you so often have seen Roethlisberger reload, start to move, and have to reload and throw again. And that's not something that Brady is going to embrace. So does he go away from Antonio Brown at all? Does he bitch out Antonio Brown at all?
This is a recipe for disaster. This is trepidation. I hear the trepidation in your voice, Tom.
Yeah,
I really do.
If you love football,
it's not good.
If we love football and we love the sport, we're fascinated by seeing how it plays out. But unfortunately, the soap opera aspect of it and the personality aspect of it is going to become a major fixation for us as well throughout this.
Now, I've heard some people talk about the $9 million guaranteed bonus. And me personally, I think if there's one organization where you can get away with that, you're going to get a pass on it in terms of the attitude of the players. It might be the Patriots, but do you think that could be an issue with him getting that big money after everything that has gone on the last 72 hours?
I looked to Julian Edelman as the barometer for that, because here's a player who was a 7th-round pick, has busted his ass. He did not have the same start to his career that Antonio Brown has, but there are ways that you could compare what Julian Edelman has done since 2013 to Antonio Brown. Not on the same level of production, but per game production, pretty good, especially postseason production and reliability and special teams production. So he's going to make more than twice in salary what Julian Edelman makes, and he makes the same in guaranteed money. So I took him as a barometer. His embrace of him on social media, at least, was pretty significant. Now, where do brands and marketing stop and real people begin? Yeah, that's something we have to deal with more and more as media members and as fans. So we'll see how that plays out. I have an individual who's not even in the media, but he'll often text me, and somehow he's piped in with the Patriots. And he intimated that last night at the game in some of the players' suites, there was a lot of consternation about the amount of money that Antonio Brown was going to see. And that's not something it's easy for me to relate that anecdote to you because it's kind of flimsy. And I think anybody watching right now can understand, okay, could be somebody's aunt sitting over on the side saying, I can't believe they're giving him that money.
Right.
So it's not what I would call any kind of a report, but it's something that you have to gauge on any team. What's the pay structure and what's the guy getting who comes in? And that was my jumping off point, Brooksy, and doing all my stories leading into it is you're rewarding a guy who just quit literally on 2 different teams within 8 months.
I'm wondering about your read. I mean, you've been around that for so long, that situation. Just your read on a superficial level of Brady's reaction to it in a public sense. What are you thinking when you hear what he's saying and what he's not saying, what he's doing, what he's not doing in the aftermath of the decision?
Yeah, it's been great to watch because he was visibly pissed off last night, I think, in the post game to understand that his conversation with Robert Kraft was related by Robert Kraft to Al Michaels. And then he reiterated that today when he was asked on EEI during his weekly stop in about having Antonio Brown stay at his house. He goes, apparently, basically saying private conversations, I'm not really down with having them shared. So the quarterback and the owner seemingly are going to have a conversation about the owner not being as discreet as he could be or should be. But Brady and Antonio Brown share the hard work and diligence and sweat equity aspect of football, but I don't think that they share the quote-unquote respect for the game aspect, as hokey and cliche in 1950s and 60s as that might sound. I think that Brady subscribes to it, and I think a lot of Patriots subscribe to it. This game gives you a lot. Brady says this all the time, and I think a lot of the Patriots players feel that way. This game has given us a lot. How do we treat it? And the league is a different entity. And New York 345 Park Ave is a different entity. But the game itself should be treated with a particular reverence, I think. And how are you going to prepare yourself? And I think Brady will stay, and the jury on it will stay out until he sees what he's dealing with. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah,
absolutely. Now,
your earpiece is killing you, huh?
We're visiting with Tom Curran of the NBC Sports Boston. And Tom, when you look at last night, I read your article last night where you detailed the offensive game plan. What happened in that game?
They just confused a team that wasn't sure what it was going to see. In the first week of the season, always, Brooksy, is going to be so confusing for every team. But the Patriots, and this is where their versatility comes in. And people here in New England get agitated when I say that their skill position players, generally speaking, are above average at best. You know, Julian Edelman is brilliant, and he's as good as any player in the league with that skill set. And Josh Gordon used to be one of the best in the league. I don't know if he still is, but he's still pretty talented. But James White is a good player who knows his job. Rex Burkhead, fine, good. Sony Michel's probably upper tier running back, all down the line. But they have so many varied skills that when Josh McDaniels puts together a game plan, he can do so many different things because they all study their asses off. They understand the stresses on the defense that will be posed if they do certain things within the framework of their offense. And they can say, well, I'm going to be sitting on the sidelines for this package, this drive, because we're going empty. So I'm just going to be standing here with my arms folded. And if it works, I might be standing over here again. And if it works, I might be standing over here again. So it's that intricate game plan that catches a team on its heels because they've thrown so much at you. And again, to refer back to Brown, how will he deal with a 3-catch, 41-yard game? Because it was a Sony Michel, Rex Burkhead game.
That's the $64,000 question. I think it's not being overlooked, I'm sure, in New England, but one of the big stories, though, if not the biggest story for me coming out of that game, was the defense of the Patriots. Was that a function of the Steelers, or is this Patriots defense potentially a transcendent defense?
No, that's them. I think that's them. And some of it had to do, I thought, with the offense being so efficient, scoring 4 times in 5 possessions. And then I thought I saw Roethlisberger saying, well, I'm not getting anything underneath. We're not getting anything in the running game. I better just start heaving it. And I think that there was a desperation aspect. But, you know, that is what they're going to be. They're going to be really, really difficult to run on. There are teams, you've watched these leagues long enough, and especially the NFL, where you know that what you see week 1 is not indicative of what you're going to see week 3 or 4. So, I mean, I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if next week's game was kind of competitive. It's just the way the league goes against Miami, just the way the league generally goes. So, but this defense should, throughout the season, be one of the top 5 defenses in the league in my estimation.
What's your assessment of the Steelers right now?
Well, they're probably happier to come to work, even if they're dealing with losses. I mean,
that's a tough situation. You're happy, but
I know
what happens. They don't have that weapon. They really missed Brown last night. That extra little dynamic that you throw in there, you can't account for. And I think when you talk about you mentioned this earlier, the improvisational nature that makes him fit so well with that offense, and that's Roethlisberger's personality that might not work in New England. Boy, that could have made a big difference last night in that particular game for the Steelers.
I don't think Dante Moncrief, at least he didn't show last night that he really has the belly for a high-profile game of that nature. Maybe he just had a crap game. I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't overstate it like that, but he was undependable. And if he's your number 2 with Juju Smith as your number 1, you need a better player. And that's where you look at the Martavis Bryants and the Eli Rogers and go all the way back to Emmanuel Sanders. I know that's almost ancient history, but they've cycled through a lot of good players at that position. And now, other than Juju, they're going to be a little shallow. So I don't think it bodes well. When I did my power rankings, and everybody's got to have power rankings, I had Pittsburgh around 9 in the AFC, and I'm probably not going to change that based on what I saw last night.
What about the comparisons to Randy Moss? Is that an apt comparison between Brown and Moss?
Moss played with worse quarterbacks than Brown did. I mean, Dante Culpepper was fine, but Moss was, but still limited somewhat in what he was doing. In Oakland, I think it was Kerry Collins and maybe Andrew Walter.
And people talk a lot about the losing, that he was trying to escape the losing in Oakland. I mean, do you think that is this apples and oranges with Brown?
I think it's apples and oranges, and the shooting is way out of town. I also think it's apples and oranges. See if you agree with this or not. There was an aspect to Randy Moss, and the Patriots kind of felt this way, that most of his issues centered around football, spraying officials with a water bottle, being an irritant on the field, saying I play when I want to play. The meter maid thing, yeah, it's not like he was driving 40 miles an hour. He was nudging her. That's being a dink. But with Antonio Brown, you have a guy who cannot seemingly control his temper, flinging stuff off a condo roof, going 145.
Infantile. I mean,
yeah.
Over and over. Just listening to, and I know you posted an article when you were listening. You posted an article about the podcast that he did, that one podcast that Antonio Brown did, and he, first of all, the whole thing of recording people. Who knows if Rosenhaus knew he was being recorded? Right. But he comes off as really almost a child.
Yeah, it's very, and I keep feeling that way, and that's probably one of the reservations. I was talking last night about this. When I've been writing about him not coming, I wonder how much is seeping in to my coverage and opinion, the idea that I don't want to deal with a 31-year-old man who acts like a 12-year-old.
And they have that childlike contrarianism.
Yeah, and I have to.
You can't beat. You can't win.
Yeah, it's funny because I don't see the humor in it. Got a truck coming by, so I hope it's not too loud. We're out of the farmer's porch here in Lakeville, Mass. Here he goes.
That's a big delivery for Mr. Curran.
That's a big lumber delivery down. New house going in. But I don't think it's funny. Maybe I'm getting old. I think it's kind of sad.
It's not fun. You just took the words right out of my mouth. It's really sad. And it's like, for me, I fear for Antonio Brown after football is over. It's a road to nowhere for him. That's what I heard with a phone call with Gruden, where he comes up with this nonsensical at the end of the phone call, I'm not all about football. Well, that's where the conversation ends. And unfortunately, I think that's where it ends, period, for him. He's got no more to say right now in his life. That's what I fear for with him.
Yeah, I mean, what are you about? Dancing with the Stars?
Right, exactly. That's the child part of it.
And it's interesting if you if you draw the parallel to him and Gronkowski. Gronkowski's got an unbelievable network of family around him because they were in the business. His father was, a professional athlete. Four of his brothers were professional athletes. The safety net for Rob Gronkowski as he transitions to post-football life is simple. He's built a brand. He's probably going to have a production company. Antonio Brown is not going to have a similar situation, and no one could probably put an arm around him and say, this is what you ought to do. Even Drew Rosenhaus. I don't know if I should even say even.
Well, I wanted to bring up Rosenhaus, and there's been a lot, and we'll let you go on this, Tom, but there's been a lot of talk about the tampering and this, that, and the other as it pertains to the Patriots. But I mean, first of all, Rosenhaus has had a decades-long relationship with Belichick, innumerable players that he's represented, and to think that there wasn't, and we know from that podcast that you posted the post about it on NBC Sports Boston, we know there was an ongoing discussion already between the Patriots and Drew Rosenhaus. So, I mean, if there's a deal in place already previous, what's your read on that?
My read on it is that something had to have gone on prior to the point at which he was officially released at 4:00 on Saturday by the Raiders. I don't think that this was orchestrated from the time that he left Pittsburgh. I spoke to someone on the Steelers yesterday just on background, and the indication was it never got to the point where the Patriots, I've seen rumors of first-round picks offered. My understanding after the conversation was that it didn't rise to the level of making offers because the Patriots understood pretty quickly that it wasn't a place that the Steelers wanted to send him. So I don't think it got to that point, but perhaps a framework was laid within the Patriots as to how are we going to do this. But I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if between Thursday and Saturday, once he was demanding his release, or once he had gone after Mayock, the Patriots began to put things in place. I just don't know the timing of it. It does seem dubious to think it just germinated in a 35-minute span.
Well, but my attitude is, we know that they were already pursuing the Patriots, maybe vice versa, previous, right?
Yep.
Back during the summer. So there was already, perhaps, I'm not making excuses for the Patriots. This is how business is done.
Oh, 100%.
But there's already a structure there. And Rosenhaus has been dealing with Belichick for so long that's a very quick conversation, I would imagine, where a lot of people might think, well, that doesn't just come together overnight. Well, if Rosenhaus has been dealing with him this long, they've had a previous conversation, I mean, it's probably going to come together a lot faster, maybe.
Yeah, there's only one place you can go, Antonio, and they're going to give you $9 million guaranteed, and they're going to give you 15 overall. There's no other place for you to go. You can't go to Atlanta. You can't go anyplace else. This is the only place you have a chance to salvage things. So I do agree with you on that, but it's I understand.
The timing, I think you're right. I do think that there had to be
but they weren't as early as people think.
Right. Or it comes together a lot faster. But I agree with you. I mean, there had to be some sort of conversation for it to be that quick. Tom, I really appreciate the time. I hope to have you on again. This was great.
I'd love to. This was much easier than I thought. I'm like, oh, shit, this podcast?
No, this is great stuff. And we're doing it every single day, man.
Yeah, look at this.
They created a monster. Look at that.
You're going to like this. Look where the dog ends up. Right out there.
Oh, my God. That is so beautiful. Well, I love dogs, by the way.
Yeah,
he's absolutely adore them.
Got him at the shelter, and he's got a good life going on. So, Bo, say goodbye to Brooksy.
It's Bo, right?
Yeah, it's Bo Curran. He's got no comment. Hey, thanks for having me. This was fun. Really nice to meet you. I've always enjoyed your work and your perspective on things, and just your sense of humor. So I enjoy it.
Likewise. Thanks again, Tom.
All right, bud. How do I dismount without looking like an idiot? Just get close. Bam.
That is Tom Curran of NBC Sports Boston. And as I said before, there literally is nobody walking around breathing right now who is more embedded with the Patriots on a day-to-day level over a long period of time to be able to speak to these issues as part of the discussion that we just had when it comes to the situation with Antonio Brown, with where the Patriots are right now in the context of where they've been in the past. How great is this team? Because we're always thinking to ourselves when you're doing these kinds of things, you're assessing a team and you're assessing them, only after one game. Even though it's a great performance, like what we saw against the Steelers, you still really don't know. You don't know how good is this Patriots team going to be. Now you throw in the extra dynamic of Antonio Brown. What the hell is that going to mean? And that's why I'm interested in hearing, if there's Pats fans out there, I'm interested in hearing your opinion of this. Do you think that Antonio Brown, if you hit that fan line, I'm interested to know, do you think Antonio Brown, is he going to be on this Patriots roster week 16? Hit the fan line button at the top right of your screen. We're going to be doing this every day. I want to bring some people up. I want to chop it up with Patriots fans. Interested to hear what Steeler fans, that to me is really gotten lost somehow. Somehow it's gotten lost in this situation. Look at the state of the Steelers. And what exactly were they missing last night? They were missing precisely what Antonio Brown would have brought to the table. You saw Roethlisberger do what he's always doing. He's always improvising. He's always escaping, right? Somehow, the big pizza face Ben Roethlisberger all over the field. And he was looking, and it was almost as if, part of me as I'm looking at this, it was almost as if Ben Roethlisberger was looking for Antonio Brown. He was looking for a guy who could improvise out of busted coverage, because that's kind of what the Steelers and Ben Roethlisberger and the Steelers in general, that's what they feed on. They feed on improvisation, and they were wholly exposed by a precision instrument last night in the Patriots. So go ahead and hit that fan line if you want to have a conversation about the Patriots, about the Steelers, about Antonio Brown. We haven't even talked about John Gruden, that whole situation. Love to talk to you about it. because I'm wondering if Patriots fans have a little buyer's remorse. Are you a little worried now about bringing in Antonio Brown following that performance by the Patriots over the Steelers in the way that they did it? But if I'm a Steelers fan right now, and I know it's Overreaction Monday after every NFL Sunday, if I'm a Steelers fan right now, I'm feeling a little sick. Number one, we know we're not going to have Antonio Brown. Number two, you saw what's going to happen now without him. And most importantly, I think, when you look at the defense of the Steelers, this is the way they always do defense. Very rarely do they make adjustments. And what are they relying on? They're relying on their offense. They're relying on playmakers. Antonio Brown, when you talk about the word playmaker, all right, take a look at yesterday. When you look at what Lamar Jackson did and the kind of routes they were scoring touchdowns on right down the field, there wasn't a whole lot of art going on there. It was all science, straight down the field, fly patterns, whatnot. And it was a matter of speed and running the right route, being in the right place at the right time, right? Not a lot of art to it. Well, that's what the Steelers do. They're the exact opposite. They're a team that relies on improvisation, relies on running the wrong route, and then making up for it with athletic ability, Roethlisberger's ability to anticipate that. And they don't have that now. And because of that, the defense is going to be that much more exposed when your offense it's not efficient. So you saw the result. When they're not consistent offensively, that defense, which is not all that great to begin with, it's certainly overrated. It was last year, looked like more of the same this year. You really wonder if there could be, a changing of the guard in that division. There already, kind of was last year anyway. The Steelers, though, remember, the Steelers have been a sexy bounce back pick, right? Just like, I don't know about you, but I don't know how many people I heard yesterday talking about how the Steelers were going to go up and beat the Patriots. Did you hear that? Did you hear all the media pundits? Because I did. I heard people picking the Steelers, and I heard people picking the Jacksonville Jaguars and taking the points against the Chiefs. And I thought to myself to stay away from both of those things, because not only was the value of those wagers being hammered down by the media as they were the sexy picks of the press and the media and the radio and television and internet, but I mean, usually when that takes place, there's something wrong. And we found out there most certainly was. Another interesting dynamic, though, what fascinates me a lot about the Patriots in particular, and Tom Curran of NBC Sports Boston, he touched on it earlier, was it really is bizarre, but the relationship between Kraft, Belichick, and Tom Brady, because there most certainly is some connectivity there, but there's also some crucial disconnectivity. And there's no better example, I think, of someone willing to take one in the shorts, willing to subjugate their ego for the betterment of the team, the betterment of ultimately his own personal situation, and that's Tom Brady. If you want to look at the MVP of that triumvirate, it most definitely is Tom Brady. The guy's committed, the guy works hard, the guy has a lot of talent, but there's a lot of people like that. He's got an extraordinary coach in Belichick, extraordinary owner in Robert Kraft, really an outlier type owner. But along with those kinds of relationships, he's got to subvert his own personality, his own wants. That's exactly what he continues to do. And you think about how long Tom Brady has been around, right? And come to find out about Antonio Brown pretty much the way everybody else found out about it. That's got to be really, really, to an extent, disconcerting, because you're Tom Brady, right? And you could certainly make the argument that the Patriots certainly wouldn't have won all the Super Bowls that they won without him. I mean, Belichick's coaching record kind of speaks for itself before Brady got there. But and just getting a note here from Cam Smith, our producer in Boston, saying that Tom Brady Sr. recently said he had no doubt that Tom Brady and the that Tom Brady can play until he's 47. Bauer has a comment from us, and I got to get on that FanCred app, guys. By the way, I got to wake up and get on that app. That's on me. Start chopping it up with all the commenters. So Bauer has a comment. Brooks, your take on the Steelers completely failing to adjust in the second half. Boy, one guy to follow, Bauer, if you go on Twitter in particular, is Warren Sharp. Warren Sharp has really kind of exposed the Steelers for what they are. You've got to go on and check it. I think it's called Sharp Football. But he's a tremendous guy to follow. And not only were they doing it last night on defense, but they weren't making adjustments, Bauer, on offense. And, that's why I was wondering when I was talking to Tom Curran, is the way that the New England Patriots played on defense, was that a function of the Steelers, or was it a function of the Patriots having a great defense last night? And Tom seems to think that it's that is going to be, a top level defense. And coming into the season, early on in the season, I think everybody's kind of used to all teams having missteps, but the Patriots are like every team. They'll have missteps. And how many times have we gone into years where they had, a makeshift patched together with gum and string defense? Well, not this year. Looks like they're way ahead of schedule. So the New England Patriots, I think, obviously it's a cliche to say they've served notice on the rest of the league. But in talking to Tom Curran from NBC Sports Boston early on in the conversation today, it really, the way people are talking right now in the context of Antonio Brown, honest to God, it's famous last words to me. It really is. I don't think Antonio Brown's going to work there. I think Antonio Brown, from having insight into his personality, from having heard that podcast, from him recording people like Gruden and Rosenhaus, just the way he is, he has this childlike contrarianism to him. And you say to yourself, and I know I've gone on and on about it, you go back and you look at Pittsburgh now, and you wonder, how in the hell was he able to keep that together with the Steelers? Well, you have to believe that there was support staff there. And I know assistant coach Ricky Mann has gotten a lot of credit for keeping Antonio Brown together. Boy, I got to get this IFB together. But I've been sitting there trying to adjust it the whole damn time. So, yeah, I never should have took it off. But give me 1 second to put this back on and try to clip this sucker or whatever. It doesn't fall off. Just throw it in there. All right. Okay. So let's see here. So you can tell there's a lot of stuff going on with the Steelers, Antonio Brown, the Patriots. And if you want to talk about it on the fan line, I'm going to be here, guys, every day, and working on the microphone now. I'm going to be here every day, and we're going to be talking about these topics and subjects, not only just the Patriots and the Steelers, but I know we have a very strong presence of fans on the FanCred app, in particular in our community. I've been messing around in the app, engaging with fans. So I hope to hear from you guys on the fan line. Come on in, and we'll talk about it. We'll chop it up. And because as we go forward, I have a feeling that the Patriots are going to stumble if they invest themselves in Antonio Brown. I don't think this is going to end well. I don't think he's probably going to be on the roster by the end of the season. I'd be very surprised, not just because of his personality, but because of the style of play. Tom Curran mentioned it early on, the style of play. How is he going to fit into this precision offense that you saw them slice and dice the Steelers? It was almost bloodless in the way they knifed through the Steelers. Before you knew it, there was blood everywhere, right? But is that going to be Antonio Brown? No, it's not. That's not how he plays. He relies on chaos, just like, I guess, in his personal life and the way that he's treated people. So I don't see that. I really don't see that being an asset to the Patriots. And I also wonder, now knowing that Bill Belichick was the guy via Drew Rosenhaus to bring in Antonio Brown without consulting Tom Brady, and Robert Kraft had a role, and Tom Brady's the last guy to know. It's one more thing. I'm not saying that this is going to fracture the relationship or cause a major rift, but boy, oh boy, you start to wonder at some point, could that affect team chemistry? I think as long as the Patriots stay healthy, then everything's going to be fine. And I will say this in Antonio Brown's defense, in the Patriots' defense, and nobody knows this more than people who follow the Patriots, you guys out there, that the Patriots, like any other team, they're going to have injuries. They're going to have problems. They've had a lot of problems at depths at times, especially at the receiver position. And we're talking about how great the receivers are right now. Yeah, they are. But it just takes one injury. It just takes one problem. Right now, it's kind of an embarrassment of riches. You bring in Brown. My whole point about Antonio Brown is this is a guy that may have trouble with the Patriots, but if they get an injury, which you usually do, if you get a problem, then you're thanking yourself. And for all we know, look, it may be a 180-degree situation. Antonio Brown may completely change, and he may be a different person with the Patriots. Somehow I doubt it, though. So this is Sports by Brooks on Fan Cred. We've been talking NFL football. To me, the biggest story by far in the league so far. Of course, we've got a couple of games coming up tonight. We've got the Texans playing the Saints, and we've got the Raiders taking on the Broncos. And John Gruden, you wonder what's going to happen there. You wonder how much longer that he's going to last. I think when you look at the pending move to Vegas, at this point, Mark Davis has really made his bed, and Gruden will probably get as much rope as any coach in the history of the National Football League. And so I don't expect anything to happen there this year, and I expect them to go 3-13, 4-12, 2-14. When you got a quarterback that won't be there next year, it's just a complete, utter disaster. And the day it all started, that slippery slope was trading Khalil Mack. I'm not so sure that, I should say that people have said, well, the game has passed by John Gruden. Well, we'll give it another year and see what happens. But we're going to be talking college football coming up, and that's really what I've been itching to talk about all day on the show. Talk about Overreaction Monday, because there were a couple of developments in college football that we're going to talk about today. In particular, we're going to talk about the LSU-Texas game, all right? And more it wasn't just, when you mention, we're going to break down LSU-Texas, great, wonderful, that's great. Well, normally an LSU game breakdown, not all that exciting, not all that. Even if they're a good team, not all that much to look forward to, right? But this year, they've turned over a new leaf in a big way, in kind of a revolutionary way, and that's somebody that I want. That's something I want to talk to Tim Brando about, who's in the state of Louisiana, is going to be joining us here shortly, and we also want to talk about Keaton Slovis. And I want to talk about that Penn State team that Tim saw over the weekend. So, hey, Tim, how are you?
Hey, how are you? Sports by Brooks is back.
Yeah, it's great to see you. Great to see your face, and excited to talk to you in particular today, Tim. I can't remember a Monday, and I'm just being honest here. I can't remember a Monday where I was more, at least early in the season, where I was more excited for college football because of what we saw. LSU, Texas, that's great. That's fine. That's good. It's a great game. But more specifically, that LSU offense was absolutely revelatory.
Yeah. I think a lot of people were really, really surprised at just how open that offense was. They've been told many times before, expect something different, but they really didn't get anything different. But Joe Brady, who came over from Sean Payton's offense, is a difference maker. And it's not like Steve Ensminger, who's about 3 years. Let's see, Steve would be, I think, maybe 2 years younger than me, a former quarterback who shared quarterbacking time in my first year covering LSU in 1979. He and David Woodley were the two quarterbacks for Charlie McClendon in their last year. That was the first year.
I would love to get a photo of you from 1979. See your getup, the size of that tie knot.
Yeah. There are a few of them out there. You can go to my Instagram and see a few.
Embrace it. You
Yeah,
just
it's
embrace
there.
that, right? You can't hide it.
A lot of locks, a little less makeup, and certainly less just for men.
And that was right before ESPN, or that was
year
a prelude to
ESPN.
ESPN.
Yeah, my timing was pretty incredible when I look back on it. I got married in '78, moved to Baton Rouge that year, started doing the first ever nightly talk show in that town for sports in '79. Began covering LSU for a cable. Cable had just come out. ESPN was just born, and they had these huge boxes where you could do pay-per-view. And they hired an athletic director from Miami who had worked for Joe Robbie, and prior to that had worked in Cleveland, Bob Broadhead, who fashioned himself as a TV maven. And he started this pay-per-view cable thing that the school owned called Tiger Vision. And this was just before the Supreme Court ruling was going to strip the NCAA of its rights of controlling.
Was that a way to try to get around the NCAA?
It was. And so they would tape the games, and then they would carry them live and put them on pay-per-view.
Wow.
They would challenge the NCAA on that.
So Walter Byers loved that, didn't he?
Oh yeah. Yeah. And I became the host of the Bill Arnsparger show, the host of the Dale Brown show.
Dale Brown. What a time that must have been.
Yeah. But guys like John Ed Bradley, a wonderful writer, as you probably remember, wrote a marvelous book. He was with Sports Illustrated. I think still does on occasion write some stuff sports related, but a marvelous author. He was the center on that team. And David Woodley, who, as you know, is now passed away, was a Byrd High School product from my hometown, just a year or two younger than me, and Steve Ensminger, who had played at Central High School in Baton Rouge, were part of the quarterback shuttle that was in vogue back then, and McClendon did it all the time. I mean, Burt Jones shared time at quarterback. At LSU.
The Ruston Rifle.
He didn't play every down, and he was an All-American, So I covered that team in '79, and by '81, '82, I'm doing all these games. And then freelancing for ESPN began in '85, and I moved to Bristol in '86 and started Game Day in '87. So, yeah, my timing was pretty impeccable. But the reason I brought up that timing is because Ensminger is only a year or two younger than me, and he wasn't a fashionable hire. When Canada leaves and Orgeron and Canada go sideways, everyone's thinking, well, they're going to go get some new hot commodity offensive coordinator, some Lincoln Riley type, and he didn't. He went with Ensminger, who was an old guy who had come back to Baton Rouge to coach tight ends, and I don't think the pundits knew that much about Steve. And I knew Ensminger knew offensive football to the extent that he could spread it out and do some things, but he doesn't have any issues with ego. And he knew that there were some other things that they could do, especially with Joe Burrow. So with no pride of authorship, he says, hey, this guy down there with Sean Payton is really good. I'm hearing great things about him. And Orgeron knew about it too, because Orgeron had coached on Sean's staff as a D-line coach after he had been fired at Ole Miss and before he went back to USC. So between his period, fired at Ole Miss and going to USC, Ed had gone down and worked for a year. I was doing the preseason games for the Saints at that point, and Orgeron was on the staff. So I think intellectual property coming from Sean Payton into LSU's offense is pretty special. And that's what's going on. If you watch that offense, at no time did they not continue to push the ball vertically through the air. They were going empty, and they were going tempo. 5 wides, empty backfield. And that isn't to say that they didn't run the ball well. They did. They had a lot of yardage on the ground too. And they've got good backs. But this is what everyone down there has been dreaming of really since
Burt Jones.
Saban, since Saban got Sark. Since Saban brought Kiffin and then Sark into their offense, LSU fans have been saying, well, when are we going to get our guru? And with the combination of Ensminger being a really team guy and a guy that knows the game very well, and the infusion of this new intellectual property from young Joe Brady, who's right there with him in the booth, they've put together something that's going to make Joe Burrow, I think, a Heisman candidate. I mean, I think this guy.
This is, what this is,
to go
Tim.
to New York if he keeps it up.
And I said that this morning on Twitter. And this is like Emsinger and Joe Brady. This is like a buddy movie.
Yeah,
You know, watch those guys up in the box.
Yeah.
And you got the older guy, and you got the lethal. I don't know what you want to call it. I was going to say lethal weapon. That's probably not applicable, but it's like a buddy movie. And Joe Brady, after that game against Texas, is tweeting, Emsinger likes to sling it. I mean, to me, this is the storyline potentially of the college football season. And I can't remember. And really, to me, it breaks up kind of the gridlock that we've had. And I always call it overcoaching or the over-reliance on talent alone that I think we've seen kind of ushered in the Alabama Nick Saban dynasty era. Perhaps I'm being too hard on him, but to see it really was like a bright ray of sunshine coming in when you saw what Joe Burrow was able to do. And now we go and we look at USC. And I know it's the air raid, but what about you? Are you as excited about USC potentially being back with Slovis and this young quarterback?
I am, but there's one big problem here. And the problem is every fan base is different. And LSU fans, they just want to win. And they were tired of seeing the I formation and pound with Leonard Fournette when there's six, there's seven in the box and you got six or five blocking. It's not going to work. LSU was ready to see the spread. Okay. Certain programs have issues getting past their own view of themselves, their image of themselves. Remember how Michigan just turned on Rich Rod? He hadn't even called a play and they turned on him because you got to win, but you got to win the Michigan way. I think that's part of what's going on with Harbaugh and Josh Gaddis right now. I mean, he won't give him the keys to the car. I mean,
really?
Donovan Peoples-Jones is out there, and he can't smell a pass. I mean, he can't. It's like the ball's not coming. So USC fans, and I've talked to many of them, and as you know, I work with a lot of them. Petros Papadakis is a former team captain of that.
Wait till I tell you what I saw last night. But go ahead.
So
keep going.
And these former players know football. Matt Leinart knows football. Reggie Bush knows. They all know football. But they have this view of USC being their offensive line bigger and better than everybody else, that they should be able to pound it.
It's a macho thing.
When it's 3rd and 1, they should pound it. If they see their quarterback in the shotgun on 3rd and 1, they go apoplectic, okay? Well, I'm sorry. That's not today's football. It's not. Even Oregon and Mario Cristobal does have a better offensive line than USC. I mean, Oregon's offensive line is the best in the Pac-12. But, you can't line up in I formation in today's football and beat defenses that are stacking lines. If you don't use the depth and the width of the field to your advantage in today's college football, you're going to have problems. So, I was sad to see what happened with JT when he got hurt, but I'd heard great things about Keydon, and clearly, he found those wide receivers. Vaughns is a talent. They got really good speed guys out on the edge. So they could, USC might, we don't know, but they might save the Pac-12, who's already lost Oregon and Washington in successive weeks in terms of having, a shot to get something done, in the national narrative. Right now, I think USC is a silver lining, if you will, along with what Herm is doing at Arizona State to some extent. He's got a bad offensive line. USC's offensive line is not good. It's not USC standards. Arizona State's is bad, and they're going to go up against Michigan State in our game on Saturday afternoon, and that's going to be a tough take against a team that's as good as the Spartans are against the run. They were number 1 in the country against the run last year. So, I think that the Slovis story, because it happened late on Saturday, maybe people are a little bit slow.
To me, that's the charm. You know what, though, Tim? We've been around. That's the charm of college football, that we can actually come in, and I actually feel like today I'm on Twitter today. So we're 48 out to 72 out from, and I say about Slovis, in case you missed it. I mean, this is like 1975 or something. No, but I don't know what it is. Part of me, you just never get that out of you. And that's what makes it all the more intriguing. Well, it's funny you bring up Petros though, because I did Petros's first radio shows. I was his co-host.
Did you really?
I used to do the
On
USC
KMPC,
broadcasts with
the KMPC days.
yes, KMPC, exactly. Sporting News Radio,
Mhm.
101, all that stuff.
I was on Sporting News, and they hired me in 2001, and they had me on out in LA, and I drove people, I'm sure, crazy talking college.
I remember it well.
Yeah. And Petros is, as you know, a different animal on the radio than he is in person. When the light comes on, it's just this maniac comes out that those of us that see him in the booth and around the TV studios don't know. But I love the guy. I don't know of a better team player in life and in sports than Petros.
Yeah, and that I remember when I was at Camp BC, he had yet to go on and co-host a show or host a show regularly. So I was there, and I had done Kirk Herbstreit shows when Herbie was getting started, and he had already started to an extent. He was doing solo weekday talk shows, 3-4 hours a day in Columbus. And so we met when I was doing the Yankees AAA games in Columbus, and Herbie kind of recruited me to come over. So I went through that process to an extent with him for a couple, 3 years. And then I went out to Los Angeles, and it kind of history repeated itself as Petros was right there. But I remember, it's funny, what you're saying really speaks to me because, the Papadakis family in general, John, I mean, it's such an incredible personality, the whole family, USC legacy.
I've met his brothers. I wish I had been involved with Petros when they had the restaurant, and I could have seen him in full glow, glow, I love the guy. But when I've done USC games, and I'm the first to tell you that it's preparation is not just about listening to sports information directors and operations guys and coaches of that team. You need to talk to other people. I'm big on talking to the radio voices from time to time because they're there every day, and they're not just going to pump you full of the same old, PR stuff. They're going to tell you what they really see. Like Jack Ham at Penn State. I love talking to Jack last week. And Steve Jones, who calls their game.
And you just saw him last week.
I did. But Petros, I would call him. The last one.
He's the ultimate too.
Colorado.
He's the ultimate guy.
So tell me what you really think. And so he's telling me, and he gives me like 30 seconds or 40 seconds of really TV goal stuff, And then about 45 seconds to a minute in, the fan comes out, and it's like, Timmy, this is USC, and we're accustomed to, you got a yard to go. You ought to be able to go and kick some ass.
Boy, what's funny, and I was going to get to that.
Eventually, the fan is going to come out.
That is amazing that you say that, because we're visiting, of course, with Tim Brando of Fox Sports, longtime guy. You know him, you love him, and so I'm watching Fred Rogan on Channel 4, the longtime anchor here in Los Angeles.
Doing a show at KMPC at that time, as I recall.
I actually was.
Yeah.
I think, unbelievable memory, because I was there. I should have remembered, right? And I've done some stuff with Fred on Channel 4 too here in town. And he has this show called The Challenge, which is on every Sunday night. And he has Petros on, and I'm sitting there like, I used to cover USC, used to do the games on the radio, you do the broadcast. And so I'm like a kid in the candy store with Slovis. It makes it that much more awesome that you didn't really know, at least I didn't know that this was possible.
Yeah.
And so it's like Joe Burrow. I'm just bouncing around. And Petros comes on, and Tim, it's exactly what you just said. About 45. It's a combination of what you've said over the last 10 minutes, where the fan comes out, and then the alumni and the players come out, and Petros is like an amalgam of that. And so he's on this show with Fred, and he refuses to acknowledge how amazing this development really is. I know it's the air raid. It's just like how it's similar to Mike Leach. No matter how many games he wins, no matter how impressive look at Tennessee. You think Tennessee wishes they had Mike Leach, but it never ends because he's got the so-called gadget offense. It's the same thing with USC. Petros came out on Channel 4, as I mentioned, and said, this air raid thing, it's not going to get us where we want to go. Well, where were you?
Yeah.
Nowhere.
Yeah.
At least you're on the road now.
Yeah. I'm fine with former players not losing their objectivity at some point, because, hey, man, that's who they are. They believe. That's one of the great things I'm asked often because I've done NFL through the years, and some people have said to me, gosh, Tim, I really wish you worked on Sundays. And I'm like, well, I love the NFL too. And if they want the old left-hander to come out of the bullpen in December when college football's over, and they have, Fox has called me every year and said, hey, can you do this or that game when they've had 7 or 8 regional games to do? And I love doing them. But, I've always said I'll never do the NFL at the expense of missing college football. I mean, I have a passion for it that is just through the roof. I love college football like they love their teams, and but what will happen is that loss of objectivity will come up, and you see it, and they never will. And a lot of times when schools respond to that, as you said, that amalgamation of fandom, they can really screw up. Tennessee has only themselves to blame. They had Greg Schiano ready to go, an accomplished college coach.
Well,
who did it, but he did at Rutgers some really special things.
It sure looks special now, doesn't it?
Well,
all the more special.
Yeah. But I'm just going to say to you, the Penn State thing, if a deep dive had really been done, but there was no time for a deep dive, the wheels are already in motion. I think if a deep dive had really been done, they would have found that Schiano, it was, okay, guilt by association, but I don't think that there was anything really that defamatory that happened. And so, Clay Travis has got his pulpit, and Clay goes wild, and he leads this internet pack towards the firing of the AD, the hiring of Philip Fulmer. And by the way, I love Philip. I think Philip is going to eventually get it done at Tennessee. But my point is this. You got Jeremy Pruitt because you demanded Jeremy Pruitt. He's a defensive guy. He's a Saban prototype. He's this, he's that. Okay, well, that's what you got. So, cry me a river as you get pissed off about losing 2 games in a row, non-conference at home. I have no sympathy. At a certain point, fans have got to understand that college football is a business. You've got to react to it in kind. So, I'm not making a PR statement for Schiano. Look, I know he probably, his interview probably could be a difficult interview as well. All right. And it's hard to get past some of that history. No question about it.
Well, I mean, Mike Leach was the difficult guy, and they passed on him willingly.
The moment you let the pack of fandom rule your decision-making within the confines of that institution, you got a problem.
Tell me about Penn State. I know you saw them up close, and to me, they're kind of a mystery team.
Well, speaking of that, they honored the 94 team while we were there. Kerry Collins was there, and I'm thinking back to maybe 5 years ago when Bill O'Brien was leaving and before James Franklin got there. I don't think any thought of bringing in any former team that was from the Paterno era could have ever been done. It was like, oh my God, we just have to move forward. We can't reference anything in the past. What is amazing to me is now you can go to Penn State, and James Franklin is asking these guys to come back. And he's recruiting amazingly well. I don't think, with Urban Meyer out of the league, I don't think there's a better recruiter in the Big Ten than James Franklin. And now he lost 11 guys to the transfer portal, but I think he was pretty happy to lose them.
Really? I was going to ask you about that. Why, I mean, what's going on there?
Well, the freshmen and sophomores from the last 2 years were better than the juniors and seniors. And so they were pissed off.
Right.
And so he had really a lot.
But now that option's there, I guess that's probably the answer.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, for the first time, that option really is there.
Correct. And McSorley was the one veteran player that could kind of connect everybody. But when McSorley left, everyone thought, well, Tommy Stevens is leaving. He's going to go to Mississippi State. And Joe Moorhead has gotten him. So we got problems here. But the truth is, this kid Clifford is sort of a reincarnation of McSorley. And I think Penn State, if it weren't for their schedule being so tough, they have to go to Columbus. I think they had a much easier schedule on the road a year ago than they have this year. But they're impressive. very impressive.
And that's an interesting dynamic that you inject into the Big Ten that I think the Big Ten really needs. Hey, Tim, this has been awesome. I hope we can do this again. This is really a lot of fun.
Well, truly, I remember having you on my show from time to time, and I know that you took a sabbatical for a while. It's great to have you back. I don't care what the platform is. You are always entertaining and informative, and it's good to have you back. And you can call on me anytime.
Thanks so much, Tim. I really appreciate it. That's Tim Brando, Fox Sports, and goodness knows CBS, ESPN, a stalwart in football, a stalwart in sports in general, and a pioneer at ESPN. One of the first guys on, if not he helped to launch ESPN College Game Day. And of course, he talked about his time in Baton Rouge. Tim Brando was in Baton Rouge in the late 70s covering LSU football. And we're going to go down to LSU right now, Baton Rouge at least, and get more of get at least a little bit more insight on what's going on, what I was just been raving about the entire show, and that is Joe Burrow and the LSU Tigers. So we're going to talk to Jordy Culotta of ESPN Baton Rouge. Jordy, how you doing?
Brooks, what's happening, man? It's good to be on with you. I'm standing outside the locker room and right outside of Mike the Tiger's cage here as we're about to walk into Coach Ed Orgeron's weekly press luncheon where he'll address the media.
So, I covered the SEC a long time, so have you. And that was as an amazing and a revelatory performance on Saturday as I can remember. I mean, what's it like, right? Is everybody kind of still pinching themselves down there?
They really are. And you know what, Brooks? They were doing it after last week, after seeing the offense against Georgia Southern, the way that they were so efficient within the first 5 drives and scoring. But then to come out on a national stage like they were on Saturday night and to go score for score with a quarterback like Ellinger in that offense and what Joe Burrow was able to do. Yeah, I mean, it's Camelot down here right now as far as LSU football is concerned. I mean, they hadn't seen an offense like this in over a decade.
I was telling Tim Brando, who was just on with me, if you look at Joe Brady and Emsinger, and Brady's out there tweeting some really funny stuff. It's almost like a buddy movie, right? When you look at those two guys, what about that relationship between Emsinger and Brady?
You know, when Coach Orgeron talks about the interview process of finding Joe Brady, Steve Ensminger was very influential in that. He sat in all the interviews. I mean, Brady came down with the Saints staff last offseason and explained the screen game and explained the red zone game, how New Orleans ran it. And Orgeron made his mind up right there that he was going to find a spot on staff for him. And Ensminger was fully on board. And to see the way that those guys worked together in spring, the way they carried it over in summer, and then to see the way that they've now started to develop that relationship and calling plays throughout the first 2 games. I mean, it seems like it would be weird. It seems like it's not supposed to work. But, you know, after the sample size that we have at 2 games, it seems to be flawless up to this point.
I think it's a lot of the faith that Ed Orgeron has in Emsinger and the quality of character and competence of an Emsinger, because it's one thing to say, well, Steve's been through some tough times. He's been around a long time. But the guy clearly very good at his job. I mean, that's a really fascinating dynamic that Brady comes in. So many coaches, whether it's Orgeron or whether it's Emsinger, would not have put up with that situation necessarily. They would have wanted to be the guy. We just got a comment from somebody here on FanCred, here on Sportsbybrooks on FanCred, the app, Jordy, asking, do you think Joe Burrow now is locked in as a Heisman Trophy candidate? This comes from Johnson. Go ahead, Jordy.
I don't think that anybody has accomplished what he did on Saturday night up to this point in the year. Now, we've only played 3 weeks of college football, but if you look at those 3 weeks cumulatively and see what Joe Burrow has accomplished in his 2 weeks on the field, you look at the numbers, you look at what he went into on Saturday night, that environment, the way that he responded in that possession before halftime and the end of the game possession. I mean, Brooks, those 2 possessions, that LSU scoring drive before half and that scoring drive at the end of the game, are 2 of the best drives that LSU has put together offensively in over a decade. And to see the way that Burrow had the confidence to march them down the field in both instances and in somebody else's environment that was very hostile, I would absolutely say that he's a Heisman Trophy candidate at this point in the year.
So you've been around LSU football a long time. You're there every day. Is it really, I mean, Alabama.
Yeah.
We know all about Clemson. Do you think this is a team that can go all the way, win the national championship?
Look, they have some question marks on the offensive and defensive line. They still need to build some depth there, and they need to stay injury-free, obviously, just like everybody does. But I think that they were exposed against Texas. I don't know if it was the LSU side maybe undervaluing Texas or maybe overshooting LSU up to this point. But I think that they obviously have, and defensively in the defensive backfield, they can cover just about anybody. And it's a passing game now. And when you look at those teams at the top of the rankings, they like to throw it around. So I think that LSU, they're a contender. Can they get in and win it? They may be another recruiting class away from
really. That's
line.
what I wanted to know right there, because you're there.
Yeah,
it's easy to say. Now, what that tells me is Texas really isn't there.
Texas is far off. Yeah, I would say from LSU and Texas, billing into that game was who's back. Both programs. I mean, they've experienced high success. They've seen both programs being talked about by a lot of people at some point throughout the last recent history. And people wanted to find out who was back. I would say LSU is closer than Texas after seeing them two on the field. But look, I think that LSU is a top 5 team in college football. I think that they're one or two guys away from a depth standpoint of the defensive line and the offensive line to really saying that they're a true contender today. But from as far as a top 5 team in the country goes and what they accomplished on Saturday night, I think they're right in the right spot at number 4 this morning.
We're visiting with Jordy Culotta. He's with ESPN Baton Rouge here, Sports by Brooks on FanCred. Now, Ed Orgeron, to me, there's a lot of great stories that keep going on and on about how many great stories there are, because we only really highlight the great stories on this show. But can you talk a little bit about, to people who don't know, how amazing it is that Ed Orgeron is coach? The reason I say that is he's so perfect for the job, but he took this circuitous route where you thought maybe he was never going to get that job that he really is perfect for.
Yeah, and Brooks, you know this. While he was out that year from in between the interim of USC and LSU, he spent that year on the radio with Derek Panamsky and I, who he's hired to be his special assistant now. And during that time, he traveled around to programs, high school programs, met with coaches, met with football people, and he had gone back and talked about his time, what he had learned as Ole Miss's head coach a decade before that, the stops along the way and working for people like Pete Carroll and working alongside Monty Kiffin, and what he had learned about delegation, of bringing in the right people, trusting them, and allowing them to do their job. A great story that came out of Saturday night was Ensminger on the headset with the last 4 minutes of the game when LSU gets the ball back. Orgeron says, let's go into a 4-minute offense, let's milk the clock, and let's get out of here with a win. And Ensminger fires back, hell no, put the ball in the quarterback's hand. He's playing, he's hot right now. Let's go win the game. And Orgeron just said to him right there, go win it. It's him trusting the people that he's hired in the moment and allowing them to do his job. And I think that is what has come full circle for him as a head coach. I mean, he tells the stories at Ole Miss. He wanted to be the recruiting coordinator. He wanted to be the defensive line coach. He wanted to be the defensive coordinator. He wanted to tell the OC what style of offense he wanted to run. He wanted to tell the weight room how he wanted his team in shape. He wanted to have his hand on everything. Now he's bringing in the people that he trusts, that he knows can do the job, and he's allowing them to work.
With Joe Burrow, this is a guy that we didn't know who he was until this season. Of course, last year, you really didn't get an indication of the kind of player that Joe Burrow could be, and now he's exploded. Can you talk a little bit about what kind of guy he is since you're down there?
He's confident, Brooks. I mean, this guy, he's got some swagger to him. I mean, we forget a year ago, he knew nothing about South Louisiana. He knew nothing about LSU football. He knew nothing about
Ohio
the campus.
State.
He knew nothing about the campus. He knew nothing about the culture. He had to come in, win the job, ingratiate himself to the roster, make friends, find out where his classes were, and all the while, be accepted. And he did that last year. And now I'm telling you, everybody you asked in the offseason, whether it was Orgeron or whether it was somebody from the weight staff or the equipment staff, everybody would say it's Joe Burrow's team. And, I mean, if you watch that game on Saturday night, it's tough to argue that. I mean, that cat has pride in what he does. He loves LSU, and he's playing as good as anybody in the country right now. He walks with a swagger to him. He talks with a swagger to him, and he's got high belief that his team can win it all.
Talk about what you guys are talking. I mean, I'm just trying to get a feel for what everybody's thinking in Baton Rouge and the state right now. What are you guys talking about on your radio show today?
Joe Brady, Joe Burrow, the evolution of this offense, the trust that Ed Orgeron has put into his staff and allow these guys to come in and really overall. I mean, it was 2 years ago we were still talking about LSU being in the dark ages of LSU. I mean, of football offenses. I mean, how many times have you seen LSU up in that situation like they were and just pray to hang on to win that game rather than, they used to play
Les
to lose.
Miles era, his whole era.
Oh, man. I mean, they played to lose. And to see LSU play to win and go out there and really and win the game like they did by scoring and answering on the road, people are just really high on that right now. It's just tough to get this fan base down from where they are on this offense.
Is this the highest it's been that you can remember, or
Yes.
is everybody still kind of cautiously optimistic?
I mean, back to 2011 when they played for a national championship. I mean, it was high then. But as far as the spirit, the emotion, it just feels different because they never had that full trust that Miles was going to deliver in the end, right? I mean, he was going to recruit. He was going to be quirky and bring you attention. But when the lights got bright, was he going to be good enough to handle? Ron feels like he's prepared. He feels like he's done it all the right way. So everybody's really buying in.
What is the schedule in terms of, or what are you looking at in the schedule? Where should we really pinpoint as the next crucial moment? You guys have a little bit of a break, then you got a little soft spot on the schedule. What are you pinpointing as? Because even though you win over Texas maybe not what we thought they were perhaps. So where should we be looking?
Everybody's looking at Florida, October 12th. I mean, a lot of these guys that were banged up against Texas will really have the next month off. They play Northwestern this weekend, which is an in-state. They play Vanderbilt and Nashville next weekend, which I guess is an SEC team. And then they have a bye week. So some of these guys are going to have
You
a month
guess
off
it is.
before Florida gets here.
It's rumored to be an SEC team.
Yeah, right. They get I know they get the cash every year. But
right.
Watch out for Auburn, Brooks. I hate where they are on the schedule. LSU used to catch Auburn every year in September before they got it all figured out. Now they catch them in late October. That makes me a little nervous. It's in Tiger Stadium. It's in Tiger Stadium, and the home team has dominated that series. I mean, when you look at the home team, it's something like 25-2 over the last 30 years. So the home team has the advantage. So it's the Auburn game where they are. It'd be the one to watch.
Well, I can't thank you enough. Hopefully we're going to check back in again throughout the course of the season, follow you guys, because I honestly think Joe Burrow and LSU may end up being the number one story in college football in the way that Tua perhaps was out, or at least until the championship game. I mean, you got Trevor Lawrence over at Clemson, but Joe Burrow may surpass them all. But as you pointed out, maybe not. Maybe they need another recruiting class. So we're going to be focusing on you guys during the course of the year. Thanks so much, man, for the time. I know you're busy.
Anytime, Brooks. Thank you, man. Thank you. There's Mike right there. Look, here's Mike for you.
Mike the Tiger in his compound. Look at that. What a shot. The LSU Tiger mascot.
That is a great shot.
That is a perfect transition. Thank you, Jordy.
You got it,
appreciate that.
Wow, look at that.
That's pretty cool. That's Mike the Tiger, the LSU Tiger. And we were just down in Baton Rouge. And I know it's almost like I'm fawning a little bit, I know, but I'm just so excited to be down there. Like, hey, we're talking to the epicenter of what's going on in college football. What's it like? What are you talking about? And so that's just in my blood. I mean, I'm a Georgia Bulldog. I'm an SEC guy. And if you're an LSU fan, you want to talk about LSU football, SEC football, college football, this is going to be your show. I mean, we can't give you a better example today. We've already talked to Tim Brando. We've talked to Jordy Collada. And then we're going to come out here and we're going to actually talk to somebody right next door to me here in Los Angeles, Redondo Beach to be exact, in the Rourke Media Studios, Ryan Abraham of USCFootball.com, who really, like Jordy, as you heard Jordy, by the way, say, you may have missed it, but Ed Orgeron, the head LSU football coach right now, did a radio show with Jordy and a guy named Derek Pozanensky. I got to get his name right. Derek Pozanensky. But Jordy and Ed Orgeron did a radio show together for a season when Ed was out of coaching. And he described, and this is recent, this is before he got the LSU job. Remember, he was over at USC as the interim coach, ends up out of a job, comes back to Baton Rouge, does a radio show with Jordy, the guy we just talked to, and then ends up the head football coach at LSU. And of course, there was a interesting scenario that played out between Orgeron and Tom Herman, who's now at Texas. And we talked to Ross Dellinger of Sports Illustrated, who wrote that story and described that situation about how LSU wanted Tom Herman, but then Tom Herman passed on Baton Rouge and went to Austin to take over as head football coach at the University of Texas. And that left Orgeron there for LSU. And it was really a job with Ed having been from the area. And of course, his personality. He's like right out of, as Jeff notes in the comments, that Orgeron voice. It reminds me of he's like an outtake or he's like a cast member of Swamp People, if you will. Ed Orgeron, if you know that show, I think it's from like Discovery or History, where they have the guys in the bayou or hunting alligators. That reminds me of Ed Orgeron. So a very apt situation for him, and it really all came together. The stars have aligned, and I guess Jordy passed him off from his ESPN Baton Rouge radio show, and now Orgeron's taken over the program, and he's taken over the country with this quarterback and this new offense. And we really haven't, I haven't described it exactly for you. What's going on down there exactly? We mentioned Joe Brady, and we talked to Tim Brando of Fox Sports about it earlier. We mentioned Steve Emsinger, and those two guys are running that offense. Joe Brady was in charge of the passing game with the New Orleans Saints, and he has since come over, and he is now involved in the passing game for LSU. If you're wondering what the big difference is, as Steve Emsinger, who is a veteran guy, and you heard Tim Brando describe his career at length. Well, he's still with the team. He's still with Ed Orgeron, and they bring in this young whippersnapper. And I keep mentioning the Buddy movie, and that's why, because Joe Brady is a young guy. You've got Emsinger, the older career grizzled college football assistant coach. He was actually a head coach at Louisville for a short period of time, comes back and now an assistant at his beloved LSU. So they're in the press box together, Brady and Emsinger, and they're calling the plays on Saturday at Austin as LSU demolished Texas. And Orgeron, it's an extraordinary dynamic, and I think it's kind of born out of necessity. Orgeron had to do something to take this program to the next level. LSU's always had good talent. It's as fertile a recruiting area as there is in the country. Year after year, they have all that talent, yet somehow, some way, they're not in that national championship picture every year. So they kind of had to reinvent the wheel to an extent and break out of the Stone Age offense that Les Miles for so long had implemented. And now we're seeing what happens to that offense when he goes to Kansas and has no talent, and they lose to, they beat Coastal Carolina. I'm trying to remember who they just lost to Coastal Carolina at home. Kansas did. So after beating Indiana State in its first game, so Les Miles off to really a predictably rough start. And I would be surprised. I mean, I know it's the Big 12, and there's some soft points of that schedule, certainly, but I'd be surprised if Kansas won more than one game, and with that only win coming against an FCS opponent. I hope I'm wrong, because we all love Les Miles, but Les Miles was the guy in charge of the offense at LSU for so many years. And, they wanted to transition out of that for obvious reasons. And that's what they've done. And they've done it with Joe Brady, who was the passing game coordinator with Drew Brees and New Orleans Saints. And they've done it with the grizzled veteran assistant offensive coach, Steve Emsinger. And Ed Orgeron had the confidence in himself, as did Emsinger, to be able to handle bringing in that young coach in Joe Brady and allowing him to dictate things on the offensive side of the ball. And you see what's happened. And so now you've got Joe Brady and Emsinger tweeting back and forth on Twitter. It really is a beautiful thing to see, and it's a wonderful story. But as you got it from Jordy Culotta earlier, and this was the big question I had going into the conversation with him, is although you've got a great quarterback in Joe Burrow, just how good is LSU? Are they at the Alabama level? Are they at the Clemson level. I mean, we're going to find out. They play Alabama, of course, on the schedule. But is this the moment in time where they take the next step? And is this more than just a one-off step? Is this more than just a single step, if you will? I think that's going to be one of the more interesting storylines that's going to play out in college football. And if you're on the fan line or you're interested in joining the conversation here on FanCred, we've got, if you're new to the app, if you hit that fan line button on the screen, you can jump into the conversation, talk to me about college football. So far, we've talked a lot about LSU, Texas. We talked about Penn State. We've talked about the Big Ten. We've gone to the Pac-12 with Tim Brando. And coming up, we're going to talk more about the Pac-12 with Ryan Abraham of USC Football. You can follow him on Twitter at Inside Troy. You can follow Jordy Culotta at JORDYCULOTTA, Jordy Culotta. And tell people that you know, if you're a USC fan and you're coming on the app for the first time, or you're an LSU fan or a college fan. Of course, we had Patriots and NFL talk, Steelers talk to open the show with Tom Curran of NBC Sports Boston. That was to open the show. The fan participation is very much a big part of this show. I want to get that thing rolling. We're just starting here. This is only the beginning of week 2. Got a long way to go, but we do this every day. I want this to be on your phone at all times, and I want you to think from 9 to 11 Pacific time, noon to 2 Eastern time. I want you to think, this is where I want to go. Brooks is going to have his hand on the pulse. He's going to have the guests. He's going to have the topics. He's going to go further with those topics and bring you opinions and observations you're not going to hear anywhere else. So as we understand, we now have full details provided by my producer, Cam Smith, back in Boston here on Sports by Brooks on FanCred. Here are the details on the Antonio Brown contract from Ian Rappaport, who we hope to have on the show at some point this week from the NFL Network. The Patriots have a 1-year deal with Antonio Brown, a $1 million base salary, $9 million signing bonus, $5 million is paid now, $4 million is paid later, plus a $500,000 in 46-man roster bonuses and incentives, additionally worth $1.5 million for each of the following requirements: 105 catches, 1,298 yards, 16 touchdowns. That is a total, I should say, of 15 million in incentives. Boy, I messed that up. So just trying to make something out of these details by Ian Rappaport as we get the contract from Antonio Brown. So it is essentially $5 million to be paid guaranteed now. You're going to get $4 million later. Now, I've been reading reports, Cam, I don't know if you saw this, that there's also a possible deal in place for Antonio Brown to get $20 million next season. So if that were the case, of course, he would be on the road to recoup the $30 million that he lost with the Raiders. Now, we've talked a lot about his inability to work within a structured format, a structured atmosphere, framework of a team. When you look back to the end of his career with the Steelers and you look at Antonio Brown's short-lived career with the Raiders, right? How are things going to turn out with the Patriots? My observation is I don't think they're going to turn out very well, because just in doing a deep dive on his podcast and listening to him talk and his rhetoric and all those things and how he behaves on and off the field, I don't think Antonio Brown is a typical diva. I think this guy is off on the extreme. He's off to the extreme as far as this is concerned. We talk a lot about divas, especially wide receivers, but I think he's, at the very apex of diva-like behavior. And I really question the ability that he's going to have to be able to work within what is probably the most strict system in the National Football League. I guess it's not a surprise they've won 6 Super Bowls either with that system. Will he be able to work under that system? Well, I think the big variable here, if you were to guess that he would, or you were to predict that he would be based on that he's trying to get $30 million back that he lost with the Raiders, right? And so now from what we understand, he's going to get $9 million in guaranteed money. Additionally, he's going to have a chance to make more money when it comes to the incentives. It appears that total, it would be, and that's what, Cam, I know that's what you were trying to say in this message, $15 million total for Antonio Brown going forward. So we're going to get you, I'm going to send you over Ryan Abraham's. Let me see if I can grab him, Cam. Give me 1 second. Oh, you don't have his email. That's right. Let me see if I can't get his, I'm going to shoot you his phone number right here, Cam, because we're going to be visiting with Ryan Abraham of USCfootball.com. I hope he is with us, or he is near, I hope he's with us near his computer or his phone. I'm shooting you his phone number right here. All right, let me check the other room real fast. So he's going to email you the link right now. And then we're just going to come on. All right, we'll get our trusty IFB out, and we're going to talk a little USC and Keaton Slovis, Kekedon Slovis, and it's funny because we're actually doing the show from the USCfootball.com studios here in Redondo Beach. And so Ryan is actually going to be with us in another part of the studio. That should be cool. And we're going to get you some insight in the way that we just did with Jordy Culotta on LSU. To me, the other big story of college football is USC and what happened late Saturday, in case you missed it. I know it's Monday. There's no reason why you wouldn't have missed it. You would have missed it. But so we're gonna visit with Ryan Abraham here coming up, because if you were watching Twitter and you know how these things kind of play out on Twitter, maybe you don't, but when Slovis started to really explode for the very first time, in his career at USC against Stanford, when USC, was fighting back and forth with Stanford early on in that game. And then suddenly SC pulled away, and it was Ryan Abraham who was the guy on Twitter, and I retweeted him several times, who really kind of gave you a feel or a sense of what was happening, right? He was following Slovis's numbers. Everybody's retweeting it. Everybody's eyes are opening wider and wider. And of course, I'm in Los Angeles, but I can only, that's the beauty of Twitter as history starts to play out. And we'll see if Slovis ends up a historical quarterback. I mean, this is massive overreaction, of course, on my part. But it's going to be interesting to see if he's able to keep this going, because SC certainly doesn't have what one would qualify as that difficult to schedule, right? And you would think that there's a possibility that, forget about Clay Helton's job, maybe they run the table. Maybe they go through the season undefeated. Again, massive overreaction. I understand that. But maybe they go undefeated into that Notre Dame game, That's going to add, I think, something back into college football that God knows we've been missing, and that is the Pac-12 being a factor in college football. It really isn't the same when the Pac-12 isn't a factor in college football. So we're going to bring up Ryan Abraham here in Los Angeles to talk a little bit about Keaton Slovis. And not only that, but we're going to talk Pac-12. Of course, Oregon coming off a big victory over Nevada, 77-6, a Nevada team that had beaten Purdue the week before. And unfortunately for Nevada, that team turned into a pumpkin, I guess you could say, last Saturday. So now we've got Ryan on the line. How you doing, Ryan?
Pretty good, Brooks. How you doing?
I'm doing great. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about USC football in general, but more specifically, I was just describing how when Keaton Slovis started to explode against Stanford on Saturday, I can remember watching your Twitter. And I like a lot of people, kind of jumped in and out of that game. It's kind of hard to get excited about SC football and be locked in all the time. But as I was, and what really got me to jump into the game was your commentary and you following it. Could you kind of sense that this was, well, maybe not, but history in the making, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, there was a little sense of the Sam Darnold stuff that happened back in 2016 when USC started off 1-2. He gets his first start. They lose at Utah. They're 1-3, but then they make that 9-game run and win the Rose Bowl over Penn State, dramatic fashion. I'm not saying he's the next Sam Darnold, but seeing how the USC offense has evolved from whatever kind of gumbo style they were running the last couple of years to this year where it's the air raid with Graham Harrell coming in. I think all the quarterbacks, Brooks, look really good in the spring and the fall. So I think JT Daniels could have had a lot of success against Stanford. He ends up getting hurt in the first game. But for a true freshman who was a 3-star recruit, and USC only starts 4- and 5-star guys at quarterback, having a 3-star guy come in there as an 18-year-old and be able to throw for 377 yards and over 80% completions, 3 touchdowns, it was pretty spectacular to watch. I think the USC fan base wasn't all that excited after barely beating Fresno State. After beating Stanford, I think they got a little bit, the wins in their sails have puffed up a little.
Well, to beat Stanford in the way that they did, my first question is, how good is Stanford?
That's a good question, too. I thought they were going to be pretty good coming into the season, but losing KJ Costello, I think, was a big deal for them. So in the battle of the backup quarterbacks, USC won by a landslide. And Davis Mills, the Stanford quarterback, was like the number 2 dropback quarterback in the country coming out of high school in 2017. And Keaton Slovis is a 3-star nobody who just happened to be coached by Kurt Warner at his small high school in Desert Mountain in Scottsdale, Arizona. But losing Walker Little, I think, was a big deal at Stanford's left tackle. They lost another offensive lineman during that game. This isn't the same kind of Stanford big burly offensive line that we've seen before. So some of that toughness factor, Brooks, I think is not quite there for Stanford. The roster, I think you saw USC's roster just shine, and USC's roster has been really good. They just haven't played up to their potential. Now in that game Saturday night, they certainly did, and they really outshined Stanford.
In terms of pure talent, do you think this is a top 10 in the country roster that USC has?
It is, and so it's
really,
funny. Yeah. 24/7 Sports does a talent composite ranking, so they take all of the high school star rankings, put them all together, and then if someone drops off the team, they remove them. But last year and this year, USC's number 4 in the country, behind the same 3 teams: Alabama, Ohio State, and Georgia. So you can tell those teams are very talented. As part the number of 4- and 5-star players USC still has, they're right up there in the top 5. That's why 5 and 7 last year was a head scratcher. They were way too talented to lose 7 games. So if they can play up to the potential that they have on the roster, and we saw a little bit of that Saturday night, it's all bets. I thought they would win 7 games this year, but after seeing them against Stanford, they got a real chance to make a run in the Pac-12 now.
Now you're talking about 5 and 7. Then you look at Slovis, and this team looks gangbusters. This team looks like a top 10 team in the country. Has there been a transformation with the coaching staff? Has Helton done anything differently? Because this is essentially the same USC team. Suddenly, though, I mean, did they have the same air raid offense in last year? Or is this all new? What's happening?
Yeah, so there are a lot of changes. They had to make changes. Lynn Swann, the athletic director, came out and said they have to change the culture, the discipline, the personnel, the staff. They needed to make a lot of changes.
Did you see? I mean, you're around the team every single day. You're embedded with the team. Are you seeing that?
Yeah. So I think the big one was Graham Harrell. Of course, they tried to bring in Cliff Kingsbury. They brought in Cliff Kingsbury. After a month at USC, he ends up going to the Arizona Cardinals. But they bring in kind of Cliff Kingsbury 2.0 with Graham Harrell. I think that was the biggest deal. They had a ton of offensive talent last year and the last couple of years, but they were 90th in the country in scoring, tied with Oregon State. That's baffling to me. The wide receiver core they have is the best in the Pac-12. It was last year. It still is this year. So I think that was a big change. They brought in a new strength and conditioning coach, Aaron Osmus, who was around USC before. And he's changed. I think when you talk about changing the culture, it's hard to do it for a coach who has a guy, there's very limited time that the position coaches have with the players, but the strength coaches have them like 20 hours a week. You see your strength coach, if you're a college athlete, way more than your position coach. And having a new strength coach coming in there, I think he's brought a different sense of camaraderie. And that's about as cliche as it gets, new strength coach. But I really do think in this situation it helped. And they made some other changes too. They had guys coaching out of position. Their wide receiver coach was coaching tight ends. Their offensive line coach was coaching running backs. So all that stuff kind of got fixed. And we weren't sure if it was going to work. But so far, it looks like it's working pretty well.
We're visiting with Ryan Abraham. He's part of the 24/7 network. And of course, it's uscfootball.com. You can see him on Twitter at Inside Troy. And when you look at this USC team now compared to the top of the Pac-12, at least most people think that Oregon is the best team in the Pac-12. What are the teams that USC has to deal with?
Yeah, so I think Utah was the preseason favorite to win. They've looked pretty good in their first couple of games. I would still put them at the top. They won the South last year. I thought Washington was going to be the best team
really?
In the Pac-12. Yeah, and then they lose at home to Cal. And Cal's defense is great. I mean, they bring their whole secondary back. It's the best secondary in the Pac-12, maybe one of the best in the country. But their offense has been pretty subpar. They ran the ball pretty well against Washington, but to lose at home to Cal when like revenge is on your mind because you lost last year 12-10, I think that's an issue. So Washington probably not as good as I thought they were going to be. Stanford obviously didn't. They look like they've taken a couple steps back, and Auburn didn't look amazing. I think they played Tulane last weekend or on Saturday or whatever. But for Oregon to go lose that game, I think that hurts the whole Pac-12 credibility. So they look awesome against Nevada. But I don't know. I mean, maybe they come back and make a run. But that loss to Auburn, I think, is going to hurt them in the long run. USC, though, probably still the most talented team. Curious to see what they do with Utah. They play Utah in 2 weeks. They play BYU, followed by Utah. And they get Oregon at home. So a couple of good games at home, Oregon and Utah. They go on the road to play a Washington team that, they can definitely be tough up there. So the road looked pretty tough, I think, for USC early on. But after dispatching Stanford the way they did, I don't think a lot of people are looking forward to playing USC now.
One of the themes of today's Sports by Brooks on FanCred, Ryan, has been we talked to Tim Brando about this at length, and of course he knows a lot of people out here in Los Angeles. His work with Petros Papadakis, Petros very well, prominent broadcaster, former USC running back, has worked the broadcast many times for USC. That even though they're having success now at USC with the air raid, there's still a little, even if they're a good team, there's going to be some dissatisfaction and some pushback on that. Is that real?
Yeah, I think there's still a base, part of the fan base that wants to see the student body left, student body right. But when USC
and they have the money, right? Is that the fan base that has all the money? I don't know.
The older one, yeah. But when you saw USC winning in the mid 2000s with Pete Carroll, those Norm Chow offenses weren't air raid, but they were a lot of the concepts of the air raid came from a lot of that stuff that you ran at BYU that Norm Chow did, where they were throwing the ball all over the field. But it had an element of the run game and the passing game. And I think you're seeing with what USC is doing now, the ratios aren't like Mike Leach air raid. It's not 75% passing. There's probably going to be a 60-40 split with a decent amount of run. And they ran the ball a lot in their first week because JT Daniels got hurt. But in this game, when you had Slovis going, they let him throw it early on, but then they started to run the football. So it's almost like a pass to set up the run. But I think the ratios are going to be better than what maybe some of the typical air raid stuff are. But yeah, there's some fans, Brooks, they just want to see hand the ball off left, hand the ball off right. But those days aren't really, unless you're playing like a service academy, those days are gone.
What about the running back situation at SC?
Yeah, they have 4 guys on scholarship that have been mostly using 2. Vavai Malapei out of Hawaii has been kind of the main back they've been using. He's doing a good job catching the ball in the backfield and running hard, and he's had a couple touchdowns. Stephen Carr, though, is more the electric guy. He's only had 6 carries the last couple games, but I think he has 3 or 4 touchdowns so far. He's really good receiver out of the backfield. It's mostly been a 2-man rotation, so we're kind of seeing them emerge. With a lot of the fans would really like to see Stephen Carr get some more carries, but he's the guy that can kind of break the big one. He had a 25-yard touchdown run against Stanford. So people see him make guys miss. They really love to see him running the ball. So a lot of the fans are like, hey, get this guy more carries.
You know, until actually last Saturday, the talk about USC was more about the coach than it was the team and the record with Clay Helton and what the future of Clay Helton's going to be. And Urban Meyer, of course, is hovering over at Fox over on Pico Boulevard right now, working with the Fox Sports broadcast team for college football. You know, how many wins does Clay Helton have to get in order to retain his job? And do you think Urban Meyer's in the mix to replace him if he doesn't get to that number?
Yeah, that's a big question. Now, I guess the good thing is Urban Meyer, all the reviews about him as an analyst are great. Like everyone's saying he's doing an amazing job there. He's got all these ties. I think it would be really hard to get him to convince him to leave Columbus, where he's got all this family and everything established, and come to LA. And I think it'd be really hard for USC to change their ways. Their administration, as a lot of the people have been around there forever. The last time they hired an outside coach who has national championship experience was in 1925, I believe it was, with Howard Jones. So that's not really something.
Iowa, I think, wasn't it? Was it Iowa?
No, he won one at Yale, but he did coach at Iowa too. But he won a championship at Yale.
You're on top of it.
Yeah,
That's
you're
amazing.
the history buff. I have to know what
I know. I'm trying to show you up, right?
Yeah.
Trying to one up you.
No, you're right though. But for Clay Helton, I think it depends how he wins. I think you have to win the Pac-12 South and how you look doing it. If you can lose some games but be exciting, like
beat Notre Dame.
Yeah, you want to be Big 12 bad if you're bad. Our friends over at Random Troy love to say that saying. So score points, look good doing it. They're scoring points with this air raid offense, and if they could go from 26 points a game last year to like 35 points a game, you're going to be in the top 25 as far as offense goes. I think then you buy a little bit more leeway if they show some signs. But I think winning the Pac-12 South is very important because they have the most talented roster. You got to beat Utah in 2 weeks. If they can do that, and they win 8 or 9 games, I think he'd be safe. If it's like a 7-5 type of season, then it's probably not.
Well, thanks a lot, Ryan. I appreciate the insight on USC, and thanks for the studio.
Hey, no problem. We're in the other room, which is very strange.
It's a little weird, right?
Yeah. It's like a real thing, a real studio or something. But yeah.
All right, we're gonna have to figure that out at some point. That's Ryan Abraham, USCFootball.com, part of that 24/7 network. If you want to know about USC football, he's the place to go. His website, USCFootball.com, you get a very reasonably priced subscription. And Inside Troy, if you are looking for him on Twitter, and if you're on Twitter and you care at all about college football, he is one of the integral, essential follows on Twitter because he is USC football Inside Troy. That is Ryan Abraham, and we'd also like to thank him again, as I mentioned a second ago, for the use of the Rourke Production Media Studios here in Redondo Beach. They've been very, very helpful, and we appreciate it very much. Sports by Brooks on FanCred. We're airing every single weekday at 9 a.m. Pacific, noon Eastern time. And today we had Tom Curran of NBC Sports Boston. We had Tim Brando of Fox Sports, Jordy Collada of ESPN Baton Rouge, and Ryan Abraham of USC football. Lots of great guests coming up for you tomorrow. Cam, I think we're going to wrap it up here from Los Angeles for now. And, of course, we'll be talking NFL football. You can bet after Monday Night Football. We got the doubleheader coming up tonight. Some good games, at least 1.5 good games, I guess you could say. The Texans taking on the Saints. I can't wait to see what Bill O'Brien has in store for us after giving away Jadeveon Clowney for a can of Pringles, essentially. And what's going to happen with the Raiders and the Broncos. That's going to be fascinating. And is Drew Brees going to show any signs of decline? He started to show some signs of that in the second half of last season. Will we see a little hint, a little glint of that against the Texans tonight? Very much look forward to it. So we're going to wrap it up on this end. Cam, our producer in Boston, and we will be back with you tomorrow coming up at, again, 9 a.m. Pacific time and noon Eastern time. This is Brooks Melchior from Los Angeles. This has been Sports by Brooks on FanCred.